chapter. Okay, what time we got? Okay, good. Okay. Oops. Got the water. What's this? Oh, yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and start here. I'm sure we'll have some people that'll be coming in as we go along here. So where we're heading this week is, of course, this is our class date today, Monday, be the last regular class before finals. We'll be covering chapter 19, which is all on human resources management. There is a quiz, which is currently available. It opened up at 6 o'clock, which is quiz 11 on chapter 19. True, false, multiple choice, and actually a couple of fill in the blanks as well. I promise they're spelled correctly this time. I got the PowerPoint presentation as well as 4 to a page handouts if you wanted to look at the PDFs there. I duplicated the QuickBooks Online project information into this week's folder as well. The Dropbox, the information, the project information, and the template. And we have our checklist here as well. So we'll be, assigning, of course, is the chapter 19 quiz, the QuickBooks Online project to be due at the time of the final exam, and the final exam be very similar in format to the midterm, except it's comprehensive. And below are the chapters that we covered, 1 through 7, 9 through 12, 17, and 19. So if you need to revisit those chapters, those are the ones that we did. So without any further ado, we'll get into chapter 19, excuse me, which covers human resources management. Really no numbers in this week. It's very very theoretical. Excuse me very much. So what human resources management, and this is just the introductory part of the chapter, what that is, you're managing the workforce of an organization at all levels, from the top all the way down. So you're managing executives as well as those who are not. So the duties of human resources management, both hiring, firing, recruiting as well, and dealing with employee issues, such things as I might have to do some sexual harassment training, which is required by my license now. And, anyone who's, dealing with harassment in the workforce would first see human resources in order to lodge a complaint. So human resources would deal with those functions as well. So the two major elements of human resources, and these are the 2 sections in the chapter, is job analysis, which is identifying and filling vacancies within an organization. And then personnel planning, which is really everything that happens after the hiring. So job analysis is all of what Section 19.1 is about, and personnel planning is the contents of Section 19.2. So what's done in job analysis, a company determines there's a need to fill this position. So human resources basically takes it from there. There's a job description, which is drafted, further job specifications. From those, a job application is drafted, and also elements of job satisfaction comes into job analysis. And we'll discuss each one of those points in a little more depth in a little bit here. So what a job description is, I'm sure you probably, almost everybody has seen one by now. Technical questions or technical requirements are listed of the job to be performed. So you see a job description, they tell you what tasks are to be completed and how. Are you going to use computer skills, or what kind, if you are using equipment, what kind of equipment, what kind of methods are used, if you have to have a CDL, something like that would be listed in a job description, CDL required. And job descriptions also include to whom the employee directly reports. And the employee directly reports to the vice president of X department. So for a job description, you need both flexibility and versatility of the description. You want to meet somewhat of a middle ground, not overly narrowly describing the job, but also not getting overly vague and overly generic. So a good description can often be, drafted by reading other descriptions and finding out, what to do and what not to do. So if I were to, describe my job in specifics, it would probably take many, many pages if I got overly narrow. But if I got overly generic, I would leave a lot of details out. So coming up with some middle ground is ideal in drafting a job description. So what has been used in historical times is this direct dictionary of occupational titles, which is issued by the Department of Labor. I have a hyperlink to it. But that thing was last updated 1991, the year I graduated high school. So it's a little old. It's been replaced with something called ONET, and I've also hyperlinked to that. And I'll click and you can see actually what kind of, if I looked up an industry, finance, I looked up a finance occupation, like a bank teller here. I can see specifically in ONET Online what kind of tasks a teller might perform in a work day, what kind of technology skills, the knowledge required, the skills required. It's pretty in-depth here. So these are all good items to include in something like, writing up a job description. So, and that DOT, the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, it is used sparingly. The main place where it's utilized is in the Social Security Administration's disability process. From my reading, Social Security Administration developed something called the Operational Information System, supposed to have been rolled out in 2020. And that's supposed to replace the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. So really the DOT, it was hardback. And like I said, revised 1991, that's the last time it was utilized. Well, actually, last time it's updated. So what we use now is this ONET, and it was actually like a sponsorship of the Department of Labor. It was sponsored by the Department, the Employment and Training Administration, which is an agency of the Department of Labor. So this is basically the replacement, but it's not specifically been called as much in 29 years. That's a long time. So next screens I did an ONET search for accountant, and which yielded the following screens. And they got very particular in terms of, what kind of accountant you're looking for. You get into financial examiners, financial managers, bookkeeping clerks, accountants and auditors, tax preparers. They get very, very specific. So again, looking at your detail in ONET, what you see are these items here. So from a job description to a job specification actually describes the qualifications that are required of applicants. So it's a little more into the characteristics and traits. If somebody's going to be into sales, you're looking for someone who's enthusiastic and personable and not a shy person, someone who's going to sell. So you're going to need education would be listed, what kind of educational requirements, what kind of skills does this applicant need to bring to the table, abilities, how many do you require someone with experience? If so, how much and in what capacity? And are there any physical, mental, and or social traits necessary? If there's a physical trait necessary, specifically what is it? Example in the next screen here, say the job requires someone has to lift has to be able to lift 80 pounds. Well, that needs to be spelled out on the job specifications, so the right people will be able to apply. Or if you say you're trying to fill a roofing position and you need someone who can climb a tall ladder and who's not afraid of heights, then that needs to be listed in the job specification as well. Something like my brother worked in ironworking, and you had to work out in the elements for there. So he had to work in hot conditions, cold conditions. That would also need to be on the job specification, so that as an applicant, you get a pretty good idea of what you're applying for. And also things such as computer skills, or if there's any requirement of public speaking or communication skills as well. So after the job description and specification, next comes the job application. That's just the actual means in which the employee applies for that job in question. Generally, there is some sort of formally written application. Nowadays, the application process is more internet driven and more of, it is online. It's more of almost built over a database. So the job application is going to describe that means. Not only maybe you have to fill out a formal application, but we want to have you submit a resume, submit a cover letter, submit transcripts, things like that. So that job application is going to show, the means which the firm, announces that available position, and also the advertising for it. So the application procedure, that's a list of the forms the applicants to complete, any documents that need to be submitted as well. If you are to submit references, and most everyone has to in terms of applying for a job. In what form? From whom and how many references do you need? Sometimes, a lot of the time, family references are something which is frowned upon, which always kind of didn't work in my favor because that was my main employer, was family. If anyone could speak of my experiences, it was my boss, who happened to be my father. Well, that didn't work as a reference, so I had to find others. Another good option for reference is a client. That's someone else who's worked with you. So the application channel, is this application to be submitted online, sent via fax, submitted via paper, and if so, where? And if so, when? And when is all this due? If you have to write a cover letter and send that, to whom do you address the cover letter? Where does the cover letter go and when is it due? And any reply, when do you expect a reply? In what manner? Will you get a phone call? Will you get a letter? And if so, who are you going to get one from? And what is their information? And if you're like me and you see a phone call come across your cell phone, you don't recognize the number, don't have them into contact, sometimes you don't pick up the phone. I'm one of those. So if you have the information as to who may potentially call you, you can put that in your contacts, and then if they do call, you know who's calling. So another element, job satisfaction, is good to know as an applicant for a particular position. How satisfied are the employees in performing their jobs at this entity? The job may be open for a reason. That's maybe because they have a revolving door of employees. So your exit rate and your turnover is good to know for an entity. Or you may have there are organizations which famously, never have vacancies because they're great places to work for. If you get an option to join their workforce, please do, because they're fantastic employers. So employee surveys are one way for a company to determine job satisfaction, and that is a good element to put into a position announcement. If you are working human resources and you're the one who's doing the recruiting, you can plug that the company has a very low turnover, has very high satisfaction, and employee surveys can give you some of that information. Some of the other indicators for how satisfied employees are with their jobs, as human resources, those are the individuals who are going to receive the grievances and complaints, so they know how many grievances are coming across their desk. Employee attendance, tardiness, things like that, generally reported to human resources as well. And if there's any work accidents or material wasted, that can be an indication of job satisfaction. You have employees that just really don't give a crud, and it shows. It's a very short section on job analysis. Most of this chapter, like the lion's share of this chapter, deals in this section 19.2. One chapter that there is only 2 sections and a summary, and that is it. So personnel planning is the bulk of this chapter. So what that is, personnel planning goes from the recruiting process all the way through to hiring. How much compensation and benefits are you going to give the individual? How is that individual oriented, appraised? If there's problems, how are they terminated? And If not terminated, how is anyone disciplined? So personnel planning, it is as defined here, a comprehensive process that's aimed at both finding, employing, and keeping the correct staff to help the firm achieve its objectives. So you would need to revisit the firm's objectives in devising strategies for recruiting. So getting into recruiting, there'll be an event coming up in the spring, be the job fair. I don't know if it'll be virtual or in person. I would almost guess it would be virtual this upcoming spring. There was also an internship fair this past like a month ago, I believe, and that was virtual as well. And so that's recruiting right there. You're recruiting for potential employees. And generally, you not only have members of human resources that are present at things like job fairs, but also current employees in various departments, some of whom graduated from the same school. So that's all aimed at trying to reach out to potential applicants and to attract them to their firm and trying to get the right fit for the job. So there's a couple of means of recruiting, internal sources and external. External would be something like a job fair if it's held at a location other than the firm itself and invited are people that are not firm employees. So internal sources of recruiting. So you're already an employee in this set of circumstances, but you're just going for a different job within the same company itself. So internal, of course, the recruiting comes from within the firm. So some of the examples, you see the first one a lot with Caterpillar, transferring. They transfer employees, I don't know how much anymore, but back in the 80s, 90s, that happened quite a bit. I know my dad applied for a job with Caterpillar and he would have been relocated. And that happened quite a bit. There was a lot of relocation and a lot of transferring. So transfers sometimes are tied into promotion. Well, actually, no, they are two different things. So you can be transferred, which is basically a lateral move. Promoting is an upward move, and then there's upgrading. So benefits of recruiting people from within your company to fill available positions. You know this person already. You know what they bring to the table. You know what their abilities are, and you know any weaknesses that they could possibly possess and whether or not that could hinder the performance of the job. And recruiting from within is a display of company loyalty also. It means that we believe in growing our own talent, and that's an attractive feature for a firm to have if you know that you have the potential to move upward once you're hired. So those three different types of internal recruiting. Transferring, you're just laterally moving from one department to another one, same rank, same salary. So if you were, a vice president of one division, if the company assigns you to become a vice president of a different division, that's a lateral move, that's a transfer. So promoting is going to be an upward move. Same example, vice president, but this time getting moved to a president position. That is a promotion because you're moving upward within within the company's organizational structure. There's going to be a higher rank and typically also a higher salary. So, and your promotion may be within the same department or within a different department entirely. With Caterpillar, maybe in the same plant or in a different plant entirely. That happens a lot. Excuse me. So upgrading is the training of an employee to fill a new position. So brand new position here, and we're going to take an existing employee to fill that position. So moving away from internal sources of recruiting, get into external sources of recruiting. This is what you'll see playing live in front of your eyes between basically now and graduation for you, as you get to attend things like job fairs and try to, obtain a job through external recruiting sources. So there are employment agencies. We have a couple in Peoria. There's schools, there's internship programs, internet, that's the huge one nowadays. There's classified ads, those do still exist. And I have seen help wanted signs exist, although sometimes they're, a little bit on a bigger scale these days. So employment agencies, I used one this tax season. I used Kelly Services to fill just a temporary need. We have, 4 or 5 good examples here in Peoria. We've got Kelly Services, Sedona Staffing, there's one called Manpower, there's Volt. Typically the way employment agencies work, you have an employer who perhaps just has a seasonal need for an employee, can't afford to have somebody year round or doesn't need to have someone year round. So we contract, the employer would contract with one of these employment agencies and get me somebody for, 8 weeks, starting this date, ending this date. So the employees who actually work for the employment agencies, they work at temporary locations for various time spans. Sometimes they're on a job for an extended period of time, could be a year or more. Sometimes it's just for a few weeks. So what that employment agencies do, and I can tell you from experience, that helps a third-party company like myself meet temporary staffing needs and not have to do the screening process. As you get to where you're thinking, where am I going to start? How am I going to find somebody? And in something like my field, I almost preferred somebody who did not live locally, because then you don't have the nosiness factor that can happen, in this line of work where people can get nosy about, oh, I know that person, how much did they make last year? I wanted to avoid that element. So I did go with a third-party agency. And so what you do, as the employer or as the third-party company, I pay Kelly Services a higher rate than I would normally pay someone as an employee. But that higher rate is going to cover that the employee's salary, their taxes, and any benefits that Kelly Services would pay them. So I get a quality employee for maybe a little bit less than what I would have to pay out normally. Okay. Sorry, my phone's ringing here at the office. Most people know that I'm closed by 6:30, but apparently that is not one that did. So they'll get voicemail. So some of the other options for external recruiting are the executive search firms. they are utilized in finding that. About any time Bradley finds a new president, generally there is an executive search firm that's being utilized in order to fill that position. So they're specialized in searching for finding qualified applicants for executive positions. And because they do come with a bit of a larger price tag than something like, your employment agencies, they're going to be used by larger companies or, bigger higher educational institutions because they're expensive. They're not free by any means, but they'll find you somebody who's qualified for the position. So schools and internship programs, hiring somebody through a school or through an internship program is beneficial for both the employer and the student. Student gets some valuable work experience, visibility within the company too. You might, as the student, if you take an internship with, someone like, RLI Insurance, that could very well end up being your future employer if you do a good enough job. They'll say, well, we want you when you graduate. So you gain experience in your field, visibility within the company. Another good point here is protect professional contacts for your resume. You make sure they remember you. And always ask somebody before you do put them down as a contact or a contact person, as a reference. So the employer, the benefit to them, they fill a position. They fill a needed position and they may find a lifelong employee. And some internships are unpaid, but some are paid as well. So, but regardless, it's a good thing to get under your belt an internship or something in your degree of study before you get graduated. Get a little experience anyway. Looks good on the resume. So using the internet, there is still monster.com. I checked. Nowadays, LinkedIn has a jobs feature. So does Facebook nowadays. They have a jobs marketplace built within the Facebook system. There's Indeed, there's ZipRecruiter. So the nice thing with listing your resume with one of these companies, you can search available positions. You can also access applications through these sites. You can upload resumes, conduct interviews through Zoom. Actually, the temp employee I had through Kelly Services, she was trying to get a teaching job, and she was actually a teacher by trade, and she was able to, during her time here, secure a teaching position, did all of her interviews while she was here. So that was kind of cool. She did them through Zoom. And that was right after the pandemic hit. Classified ads. Once upon a time, when we didn't have internet, or it wasn't very widely used, the back section of the newspaper was a lot bigger, and there was a lot more in the classified ads in terms of job listings. They used to be many, many, many pages long. But still, some companies do choose to put classified ads in the paper. Not only newspapers, but maybe trade publications or newsletters. And yeah, the reason for that, the classified ads are not, they're not as expensive as some of the other advertising options. And if you're looking to find older applicants, something like, what my mom does, and that's like in-home healthcare. Sometimes you're trying to find older applicants who are maybe not as technical, who not as tech savvy. So you want to get away from the internet to attract some of those people to your open position. Help wanted signs? That used to be the norm when I was a kid. Most traditional source of recruiting, usually you just put a help wanted sign in the window. And someone would walk in and say, I see you're looking for somebody. They do still exist nowadays, but nowadays you might see a help wanted sign instead, on a digital sign in front of a storefront, or on a billboard going down, Route 150. Or these signs, it could be, again, it could be digital. It could be something, like a sponsored ad in Facebook. So help wanted signs, they exist, but the way they look has changed over the years, we'll put it that way. So getting into personnel planning, now we're talking about screening and selecting employees. Once you've put the word out that you have a job available, start receiving applications. Now what do you do once you get these applications in? So you start to narrow down, start doing somewhat of a filter, narrowing down to those who are most appropriate for the job. Maybe start narrowing down by education and by qualifications, experience, etc. But there's a process involved, but generally there is a committee, and we'll talk about that in a little bit about committees. So screening and selecting, that involves reviewing the applications and the resumes themselves and cover letters and anything else that's submitted with those application materials. Once we've selected who we'd like to interview, maybe we perform a background check on them first, or also credit checks have been known to happen. Excuse me. And then we start, if there's a test that needs to take place, and we will talk a little more specifically about testing requirements, then after the interview would be the tests. So we'd start with reviewing application packages. So that's just an examination of not only the submitted application, the resume, the cover letter, maybe any transcripts from educational institutions that have been submitted. And this can be supported by your other activities, eventually conducting interviews, background checks, testing. You may check references at this point as you're starting to narrow individuals down for interviews. So interviewing the applicant face-to-face is always going to be the way that the interview is done. So nowadays, we are seeing a lot more Zoom being utilized, and that will probably be utilized going forward to some extent. And it won't replace the actual, sit down face-to-face interview in the same room. But I think it's going to be utilized more so than has been the case in the past. So interviewing the applicant is not just putting a face to the name, although that is one of the main one of the main outcomes of having an interview. The employer, it's meant to be informative for the applicant, more so for the than for the employer. And what the interviewer gets is a chance to see that person, see what their mannerisms are, what kind of temperament do they have, what's the personality like, are they, do they seem knowledgeable, how's their communication skills also. That was always the part that tripped me up on interviews, is I would get incredibly nervous. And I did not like interviews, scare me. But going through enough things like mock interviews help a lot to help shake some of the stress. So for an efficient interview, if you're the one conducting the interview, some considerations. For one, to have a committee. Have a committee involved in the process, maybe not necessarily have a committee doing the interviewing. That can be, as an interviewee, it can be a bit intimidating to be sitting across from 3 or 4 people rather than just one. So you might have a committee involved in the actual decision making after the interview has taken place. But you can have an interview in front of a committee as well. And I have had that. It does get you it does make you nervous. So you do want to start by, everybody comes into an interview nervous. So icebreakers, something like the weather, or how's your summer been, something like that, but keep it brief. You don't want to get into a long drawn out conversation about last week's episode of This Is Us or something like that. So you do want to get a short icebreaker communication out of the way and then get to the business at hand. So one thing that committee can do is establish a set of core questions to ask all applicants across the board. I had an interview with the city of Peoria for an accounting position. They did exactly that, and they were technical questions, and I was not ready for them. And when you're not ready for something like a technical question, define fund accounting, boy, does that take you by surprise. And that can really knock you off your game real quick. And technical questions can be asked in job interviews. I'm an example of that. And always do allow some question and answer time at the end of the interview for the applicants, so that they can ask any questions that they may have pertaining to the organization itself, maybe the employment, the culture at the company, what kind of, how many employees do you have here, how many in each department, et cetera. Any questions the applicant may have, do at least give them time to ask those questions. And as the interviewer, make yourself available to that applicant if they have questions at a later date that they maybe just forgot to ask. It happens. You get nervous, you forget things. So other considerations, holy cow, do it in a quiet place. Don't go someplace like One World to conduct an interview. That place is loud. So another thing that in interviews always made me nervous was when an interviewer would take notes, because just the default thing that you're thinking at that time is, what are you writing down? What did I do wrong? So interviewers should avoid taking notes, try to take mental notes as much as possible. And that interviewer should listen more often than they talk. So they're listening to that employee, that potential employee. But the interviewer should give clear expectations of the job and of what's expected of the employee. And this goes both ways. Interviewer and interviewee should not argue with each other. That's a quick way to not get selected for a job. So some of the questions which are off limits, and there are a number of them in the book. Anything, just basically anything that's of a personal or private nature. You know, how old are you? You know, that's an interesting last name. Are you Irish? Are you, you know, you don't ask those kinds of things. You know, how's your health? Do you have any disabilities? We don't ask those kinds of things. There are laws that protect people from being asked those kinds of questions. So there is a kind of a rule of thumb, so to speak, which is called the ouch criteria, which was established by someone named Scarborough in 2012. And that is that the questions asked in an interview should, number one, omit any references to the things listed: race, religion, color, gender or gender identity, nationality. Questions should not unfairly screen out a particular class of individuals. Excuse me. Interview questions should consistently be applied to every applicant. And those questions should have job relevance and a business necessity. I know the ouch is a little bit of a stretch because they're just, you know, but that's what the criteria was named. So it'd be omit, unfairly, consistently, and have. Yeah, to me that H was a bit of a stretch. So after interviewing, this is where you might check references, check a background application, or check background. Some occupations, you need to do a very thorough background check. If you interview with any federal or state government, they're going to really do a thorough background check on you. Probably a fingerprinting involved as well. So some of the things involved in background checks and references is verification of all the information submitted in the application and the resume and information given during the interview. Checking academic credentials, so that'd be, you know, going to the colleges and obtaining transcripts with employee, potential employees' permission, of course. That would be, I'm sure, part of the application and something that the candidate would sign off upon. Check the employment history of the individual, often done with you know, the contact information from their previous employers. And if a job involves driving, you might check driving records. Credit checks are not uncommon in applying for jobs, and, you know, some criminal history records as well. You know, do you have, there's some jobs that just cannot be done by convicted felon. So sometimes a criminal history check could disqualify someone. So testing, some jobs there is a test required. Formerly for secretarial jobs, you would see typing tests. I don't know how widely that's done nowadays. There may be like something like a keyboarding test, but it has to be relevant to the job which is being performed. If you're applying, you know, conducting interviews for a truck driver, you wouldn't have them take, you know, keyboarding tests unless it's relevant to their job. So job tests, they do have to possess both validity and reliability. Can't have a job that or a job test that doesn't give you really an actual gauge of what their skill really is. So another testing is drug testing, and there has to be a policy in place by the firm that drug testing is standard, and it has to be a standard that's not only established but enforced fairly and consistently and across the organization. So it can't be, a discriminatory policy. Or if somebody looks like, quote, quote, they're taking drugs, you test them. No, it has to be an established policy that's fairly enforced. Okay, so once you've done the interview, the screening, any testing, before hiring an individual, a search committee would be, a great thing to take advantage of right at this point. To sit down and talk about your candidates and what all of each one of them brings to the table. And that committee would, take some time, go through all of the, the materials, the results from the interview, results of the background checks or credit checks, or maybe any drug testing if valid and relevant. And search committee, their job is to narrow down the pool of candidates. Narrow it down, make a choice. If you're hiring 2 individuals, pick 2 individuals. So you make your choice, you let that person know in the form of a firm offer. Generally written, and it's going to include all the information pertinent to the position, such as number 1, when does the job start? Number 2, what is the job you're being hired for? What kind of salary are we talking? This is your base salary. Maybe this is how you obtain additional money. Are you paid salary? Are you paid hourly? Is there overtime? How many hours a week are you expected to work, and what days are they? And times. Who do you report to is also given in an offer. And then they would also reiterate the duties and responsibilities of the job being hired. So the firm offer is given to an individual. They don't have to accept it. So if that applicant decides, I've got a better offer, thanks but no thanks, that applicant has every right to reject it. And whether accepted or rejected, that job offer needs to be signed by the applicant, returned to the company. And if there needs to be a place on the offer, yes, I accept the terms of this offer. No, I reject the terms of this offer. And the firm should send with the offer a self-addressed envelope. Stamped would be nice. Postage paid definitely is always a plus. It increases the return rate very much, and talking 55 cents. So the candidates who did not get the job are to be notified generally in written form as well. Firms made a selection. I've gotten these letters before, of course, and generally you get the notice that we found a candidate who is the proper fit for our position. we encourage you to apply in the future. Can we keep your information for future consideration? So once you're hired as an employee, you need to be oriented, and can be a very formal event, and it can be as informal as there's the copy machine, there's the bathroom, here's the people you work with, here's your desk, welcome aboard. Or you could be talking day-long orientations, days, weeks. If you have a huge class of new employees, it is more beneficial to orient multiple individuals at once. Then you're not having to repeat yourself, 500 times if you're getting 500 new employees. So orientations are going to familiarize that new employee with not only the facilities, any technologies used, the people within the company, and the culture of the organization. So you're going to get some information about the company's, what it stands for, the beliefs. The vision statement would be given in some place here. Vision statement, mission statement. Maybe some market information. This is how our outlook is for the next 3 to 5 years. Again, that orientation may be formal or non-formal in nature. It depends on the organization. So there's many pieces of employment legislation, several pages in the book dedicated to this. And this is the legal matters of employment. Each piece of employment legislation in the book is given a little bit of a snippet as to what it's about. I didn't get overly, I didn't break down every single one of them. So some of the most major pieces of employment legislation, which have happened in about the last, not quite 60 years, have been some of the ones you see here: the Equal Pay Act, Equal Pay for Equal Work, Civil Rights, Title VII. There's the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And almost all of these have acronyms. Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, the EEOA, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, Vocational Rehabilitation Act, there's what's called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. There was a Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act. There's a Pregnancy Discrimination Act. A lot of these legislation were done between 63 and 78. And then there was this bit of things got kind of slower. The Immigration Reform and Control Act didn't come out until 86. And there hasn't been a whole lot since then. There's been some, Drug-Free Workplace Act, immigrations. I remember the Americans with Disabilities Act very well when that passed. And the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is really in the spotlight right now with coronavirus going on. So there's a chart in the book, table 19.1, which is the business laws by the firm size. So one or more employees, your firm has to meet these laws that are specified here. You have to, contribute to the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, which is Social Security and Medicare. Firm has to abide by the Equal Pay Act, by things like the Civil Rights Act, Jury Systems Improvements Act, the Polygraph Protection Act. There was a couple more, Fair Labor Standards that involves, hours in a work week and overtime, minimum wage, things like that. Civil Rights Act, and then you get into 10 or more employees. And there's more business laws with which a firm must comply. The Age Discrimination Act, Americans with Disabilities Act. As you get more and more employees, organizations have to abide by more and more business laws. So not only the business laws for 1 or more employees, but for 10 or more, there's laws for 20 or more, 50 and 100. They have affirmative action, you have Family and Medical Leave Act, and ERISA, which is the Employer Retirement Income Security Act. And a few slides back, there is a decent site here, a couple of them, to know which laws pertain to a particular business. Department of Labor website has a lot of stuff on it. Let me see. I don't think I clicked. No, I did not. So Department of Labor, it has a lot of topics here. What kind of guidance search. So if you get to know about what kind of wages do we need to employ, federal minimum wage, that's $7.25, but hey, maybe your state might have a higher minimum wage. We sure do. Illinois, currently $10 an hour, going up to 11 on 1/1, and going up $1 an hour for every year until 2025. So some of the information that's given on the Department of Labor's website. And another useful site is what's called employer.gov. And that one actually, has required posters. You can actually get your workplace posters from here. Excuse me. And workplace posters are also beneficial as they tell you what kind of laws apply to an organization of which size, and display minimum wage for the current state. There's federal labor law posters and there's state labor law posters as well. So employer.gov is a very useful site as an entrepreneur. You're going to have employees and you need employee resources. That's a good place to go. So that was So once we have our employees oriented, we need to now train them. So that's just preparing our new recruits for the jobs that they've been hired to perform. So not only going to be beneficial for the new employee, especially for the new employee, but existing employees as well. Everyone can use a skill tune-up. And also, you may have additional challenges that your company needs to keep up with, or keep abreast on new technology, new skills. You've got something, the way a job is being performed on the assembly line, there's new technology out where we can perform this job better. So we're going to retrain all of our employees, not just the new ones. So there's types of training. The first one you see in the trades, more often than not, union trades. That's apprenticeship. There's also internship. There's what's called cross-training, and then there's e-training. So apprenticeship, again, generally you see that in the trades, such as your roofers, your plumbers, your electricians, iron workers, definitely. That's what my brother did. Maybe heavy equipment operators. Just about any trade that has a union to it has an apprenticeship program. And generally you have to do some time in that apprenticeship program before you can go on to, leading jobs and being, a foreman in the industry. And apprentices are generally paid a little bit less than their seasoned cohorts. So that apprentice learns more by watching and doing than by actual book learning. My dad actually, my grandfather was a union plumber. And after Vietnam, my dad worked as a plumber's apprentice for a little while. So he actually watched my grandpa work and be like, okay, you try it. So basically it's an apprenticeship, and you have to serve for generally so many work hours before you can graduate to the next level within the union. Internships actually blend your college studies and your work experiences. So this is putting your book knowledge to work. Luckily, I was actually able to do that by working in the accounting field while I was still going to college, which helped my understanding of what I learned in class by a lot. I learned the application of it. Why is this? Sometimes you'll be in a class of what am I going to need this for? And then you see in the real world, oh yeah, I guess I did need to learn that. Cross-training is a good way of making employees more versatile. And so maybe a good example might be in something like an assembly line. Have your foreman work the line every now and then, and all the different jobs that are performed on the line. The people who fix the machinery, the ones who package the finished goods, the ones who are putting the raw materials in place, so that superior actually gets to know all the different jobs. So then when they get a new hire, they're able to actually orient that employee a lot better because they actually have some firsthand knowledge of the job. So if you know more than one job in your department, you can potentially fill that job if needed. I guess here at my office, I've basically been cross-trained as being, not only the professional in the office, but I spent a significant amount of time, doing bookkeeping tasks and doing secretarial tasks. And so now when the need arises, I can do that as well. So electronics training in the digital fields, maybe new computer technology arises and you need to train your employees on the new technology. So there's training sessions that they can go through that helps them master that computer technology. Excuse me. So some of the methods of training individuals, not only formal education like you all are going through right now. There's things I get to go through nowadays. And if you have a job that has a license attached to it, you never, ever, ever stop going to class. Education is continuing. And so there's lectures, there's workshops, there's conferences to go to. Training, field rotation, that's what we just talked about before. Role playing, and there's also on-the-job training. I didn't get into education and lectures, workshops, and conferences, because basically what you see is what it is. Your education is your higher education, your formal schooling. If you go to trade school, that would be your actual trade school education, the classes you take. Lectures, workshops, and conferences are aimed at you maybe learning the new elements in your current occupations. For myself, it's new tax laws a lot of the time, or maybe new developments in generally accepted accounting principles, things such as that. We'll get into the last three into a little more detail. Field rotation, that is typically how you cross-train individuals. So you rotate a single employee from one job to another, and generally you're rotating more than one person in trying to get them cross-trained. And this can happen right when you hire somebody. And not only if you're hiring a salesperson in a department store, maybe you're having them, open, close, do some stockroom work, put some new merchandise on the floor, things like that. So you're training them in more than one task. So role playing, acting out hypothetical scenarios, the whole sexual harassment training I had to do the other day. One of the videos had people role playing scenarios and what would you do in each of these scenarios as the employer. So the trainee learns something about the job by playing a role in one of these role-playing scenarios. The most common place this is utilized is in sales situations. So when you're training a sales employee, you give them, different types of customers which they may encounter. Somebody who's a hard sell, someone who's too busy to talk, or it's all the different sales scenarios they might see and how the best way would be to approach that kind of customer. And maybe how to read customers as well and identify them. So on the job training, hey, this sounds a lot like an apprenticeship. You learn by doing, you learn by watching them doing. Probably the most popular, most effective method. So a supervisor basically gives you a description of a job broken down into steps. You get to watch the supervisor perform the job, then it's your turn to do it while the supervisor is watching. So that supervisor then can give you any corrective guidance or, just give you input as to, what kind of a job are you doing. Excuse me. So any training program has 4 phases, and that's the exploring, the demonstration, the performance, and the review. So exploring phase, that trainer is going to decide, what is the trainee capable of? And it's from this point that the trainer can draw basically the map of training. So demonstration phase, what we just talked about here a minute ago. So trainees are introduced to the job details, the potential problems that could arise, and how you're supposed to solve those problems. The trainer demonstrates the job to be completed. Generally, there's questions and answers that might take place. And at this point, the job is just demonstrated. The next step would be for the trainee to perform the job. I do this when I'm breaking in a new secretary. I show them how to, put postage, how to use the postage machine, and then I let them do it. How to work the copy machine, and I let them do it. How to answer a call, then I let them answer one. So as the supervisor, basically you are their example. So show them first, then let them ask any questions, answer those questions, and then let them loose. So in the performance phase, as the supervisor, you are watching that trainee performing the job, and you can give some feedback and some correction. With my postage meter, I've had to tell employees, hey, you got to stick the postage tapes in a little bit. You got to hold them in while it's printing, otherwise it won't print. Or with the copy machine, if it doesn't read through the document feeder, then do XYZ in order to make that happen. Excuse me. So after the performance phase, then the review phase. So then the employee and the trainer would have a little conversation about the task itself. You did it perfectly, or no, maybe try it this way. So the trainee is going to get from the trainer the observations, the impression, and most importantly, the evaluation from the trainer. And that review phase is a chance for both sides to not only reflect, but ask questions and bounce answers off each other. Maybe the supervisor's not doing a great job of showing the trainee how to perform the task. So by going through the review phase, the supervisor might get some feedback to where, oh, I could make this maybe make a little more sense by doing, X instead of Y. Excuse me. Okay, so after you've trained the employee and now they're in their position, you've got compensation and benefits happening here. Basically, your pay system for your employees, it's going to consist of 3 categories. The regular payments, which would be salary, overtime, any benefits that the employer is providing, and any incentives that the employer, excuse me. So regular payments, generally going to be your base pay, would have been mentioned on the written formal offer. So this is, $50,000 a year is your base pay. Paid hourly, weekly, monthly, annually. So generally expressed, as a rate, either on an hourly, weekly, bi-weekly, annual basis. So base pay is just going to be your payment to employees. You do an average job. That's going to be how much money you should expect as compensation. Also offered are going to be fringe benefits. There are some that are required, such as Social Security and Medicare. And then there are optional benefits as well. So we'll talk about the required versus optional. They have one thing called de minimis fringe benefits too. Things such as like using an office copy machine for personal use. And those things are They call them de minimis because the cost of tracking the employee's benefits for using those services would be too small to even worry about. So that's not a taxable form of compensation. So if I use the office copy machine to make 10 copies of something, that's an example of a de minimis fringe benefit. But there are benefits that are required by law. Social Security Medicare taxes is the most common, and that's the actual Federal Insurance Contributions Act is what that's known as. So that's why you see it in the book as FICA. And often, at least in the book presentation, is that Social Security and Medicare, they give you combined rates. But there are different wage bases, and we talked about that last week, that Social Security is only on the first so many dollars of compensation per year per employee. And that base changes every year, and that's 6.2% of the first, I think it's like $130-some thousand this year. And those taxes are withheld from the employee's pay and matched by the employer. Medicare taxes, there's no wage limit. So that employee is paid a $10 million salary. There are Medicare taxes withheld on $10 million of salary at the rate of 1.45%. That employer matches at 1.45%. There's also an additional Medicare tax nowadays, and that came about from the Affordable Care Act that introduced the health insurance legislation. And that's any employee who earns more than $200,000. And that's an additional 0.9% that is not matched by the employer. So there is a form of Medicare tax that's not matched by the employer, but that's only for very high income individuals. And there's unemployment compensation. I believe all 50 states have an unemployment system. Those are funded by the employer only. There is no withholding for unemployment in the state of Illinois. That's something paid by the employer. I believe some states do allow for like a supplemental unemployment fund that an employee can contribute to, but the basic unemployment compensation is funded by the employer. In Illinois, it's entirely funded by the employer. So there's a federal rate, there's a state rate, and different wage bases. But basically all employers do contribute to unemployment compensation. There are some exceptions to the rules. Excuse me. So some of the other fringe benefits mandated by law, if you have one employee who is not a corporate officer, you have to have workers' compensation insurance entirely paid for by the employer. And the intent of workers' compensation insurance is payment to the employee for any injuries sustained by doing workplace tasks. So work-related injuries, work-related disability, or work-related death, there's payments to the surviving spouse. I have a cousin that was working a job and got, I think, most of one finger torn off by a piece of machinery and like half of two other fingers. And so workers' compensation is where he was able to get a settlement, and he can't work in that job anymore. So his employer had to have workers' compensation insurance. And rates vary, just like unemployment insurance for state, rates vary for workers' compensation insurance by the employer's history. So the more benefit claims an employer has on them, the higher their premiums are going to be for workers' compensation insurance. So if you have no benefit charges, you have a low rate. And it also is dependent upon by the industry itself. Some industries, such as roofing, just have normally high rates just because of the inherent danger of the occupation. There's also, for employers that have 50 or more employees, there's the Family and Medical Leave Act that's been extended as part of the COVID legislation this year, that anyone gets up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave per year. And what constitutes a family medical leave could be for the purposes of, the birth of a child. Adoption of a child has also been covered under the Family Medical Leave Act now. And if you have to take care of a sick family member, or you choose to, I have a friend who's off from work right now on FMLA because her mother's sick with cancer, and she's taking care of her. And while an employee is absent from work on a family medical leave, they are to be covered under any health insurance that they had previously, and either guaranteed that their job will be there when they return, or that an equivalent job will be there after their leave is over. So we covered the required benefits for employers. There's optional benefits. There's no law saying that you have to do any of these. Paid time off. There's no law saying you have to give holiday pay, have to give vacation pay. No law whatsoever. It's doing so makes your organization more attractive to employees. Sabbaticals, you see that in higher educational institutions. I believe at Bradley, for the professors, associate assistant and full professors, that they have to take a sabbatical. I believe it's every 10 years. Once every 10 years, that there has to be at least a semester that they don't teach. And sabbaticals are encouraged to be time to do research and or committee kind of work. You don't have to pay employees for continuing education, but you can. Payments to support your income. You have maybe a time where your regular wage is not much. Employee could give something like a bonus to you, and as an intention of supporting your income. Payments to supplement health insurance. You can have the employees covered under maybe spouses' health insurance plans, and if so, then you'll give them so much per year. Caterpillar does this with retirees. With some retirees, I believe it's the management retirees get, I think it's like $600 per year. Don't quote me on that. To help them pay for any supplemental health insurance. They just started doing that a couple of years ago. Some employers offer payments for daycare. That's an item that actually ends up on your W-2 if that is utilized. And it's an easy box to miss on a W-2. It's box 10, very easy to miss. And employers can also pay for any recreational activities or programs. Maybe if you're an employee of, City of Peoria. I'm just guessing here. You're an employee of City of Peoria. Maybe you're given like a health club membership or something to like the Riverplex. Again, just speculation, but that's a potential optional benefit as well. Around here in Chillicothe, sometimes employees of companies are offered maybe a reduced rate or free memberships to our Pierce Community Center, which is our health club here. So job incentives. So incentives to produce or sell additional units of goods. Could be commissions. And generally, that you see that most often in sales. And some occupations are, that is entirely their pay. Things like real estate agents. They are generally paid strictly off of commission and treated as independent contractors. So generally calculated as a percentage of sales or an extra dollar per unit if you're talking units of goods produced or sold. Bonuses could be, now that we're into the holiday season, you could have holiday bonuses. Some entities will give you a bonus on your birthday. I've heard of that before as well. Or for reasons such as performance. Caterpillar for years has done what they call stip payments. I think they're not doing one next year though. So sometimes those bonuses can be pretty substantial. Some individuals, I know they're 5-6 figures for some of those stip payments. And there's something called spiff payments, or also called push money. You see that in sales, usually in retail establishments. We're trying to sell this specific good right here. Maybe a certain new, maybe a new type of, energy drink that we're trying to push onto the market. You get, maybe 50 cents per unit you sell. That's an example of a spiff payment or push money payment. Some firms do profit sharing arrangements. Generally, those are investment plans that allow employees to share firm profits somehow. Seen a lot in management positions. And generally, they're seen as an incentive, not, also to, as a supplement to the annual wage. If company sees an employee working their hiney off, they decide to, give them a profit sharing plan as a result. So there's an example called an employee stock option plan, stock ownership plan, excuse me. So generally that's a purchase of company stock to give to employees. Basically the entire reason a company would purchase its own stock, which is in accounting terms called treasury stock, where you buy back some of your company's shares of stock. The intention is to distribute those shares to employees or maybe to other owners. So you may do an ESOP payment for years of service, replacement for cash compensation. And maybe we couldn't pay you very well this year, but we'll cut you in on 10% of the company ownership. Seen a lot in newly started companies. I believe Microsoft did stuff like that because they couldn't afford to pay their employees right off the bat, so they're owners, and those original owners are filthy rich today. Excuse me. But the intention behind making owners or making employees into owners of a company is to give them that feeling, that pride of ownership, and have them carry the pride of ownership into the job with them. And it is seen as a motivational factor in an employment situation. Some companies are strictly employee owned. Hy-Vee is one of those, the grocery store. Maui Gym, I think a lot of their employees are shareholders. It's not a requirement, but there's that option. And sometimes they just give company stock to their employees as part of the bonus. Okay, so now you get to the appraisal stage, evaluation stage. Generally, an employee is going to get some sort of job performance review at least once a year, sometimes twice or so. So the employee evaluation is the actual formal process of assessing an employee's performance in their job, comparing their performance to the job description and to the company's performance standards. So employee evaluation, you might hear that being called a merit rating or a performance appraisal, all synonymous. But that employee evaluation, excuse me. So the purpose is to, provide information to management for any personnel decisions. If this employee has not been cutting the mustard, do we need to send them somewhere for disciplinary reasons? Or, hey, this employee's been doing a great job. Maybe we need to consider them for potential promotions or put them in for a raise, etc. Excuse me. Also provides information to management for firm planning. So, maybe you set a production benchmark of, 20,000 units per employee for, 6 months, and nobody hit that. So that is good information to go back to management saying, hey, we evaluated the employees, nobody hit your benchmark, you better lower it. Or invest in some new technology that could help you hit it. So some of the standard items that are included in employee evaluation, performance evaluation, is the actual work that they perform and notes about the employee attitudes and behaviors, which would generally come from their supervisor. So there are different means of employee evaluations. Sometimes it's through a questionnaire. There's something called the 360-degree technique. And there's MBO, which is management by objectives. The questionnaire is just that. Give an employee a questionnaire, or it's a questionnaire that maybe human resources fills out. But the other two, the 360-degree technique, you're going to get feedback as human resources on an employee from all those people around your meeting. So not only is the supervisor going to be giving you feedback on your employee about, how are they performing their job and what kind of, attitude are they bringing to the workplace, their coworkers as well, which is a really good source of information. If that individual is working with clients, get the clients in on the conversation. If that client and that employee works with vendors, there's who you want to get a hold of. Or if they're working with customers, probably one of the best techniques when I worked retail many, many, many years ago in getting feedback from customers is you had the secret shopper, which still exists nowadays. So customer comes into your department, you never knew that they were secret shopping you. They would take note of your name, they would basically had like a list of criteria that they were looking for. The secret shoppers work for a third party outside of your firm, and they report to that company, how you did on each of the tasks listed. Did you greet them by name? Did you, were you friendly? Were you a pushy salesperson? We had a lot of, I worked at the company that preceded Macy's at the Northwoods Mall. Famous bar, and we got secret shopped all the time. And it was how we got our rankings that actually helped with our pay increases, and eventually would earn us days off also. So that's a good 360-degree technique, is secret shoppers. But also, gauging the feedback from employees as well, fellow employees. So management by objectives, kind of like a statistical approach. You're looking at the employee's output compared to the mean. So are they, way, overproducing everyone else, or are they, slacking behind? And good way to determine whether you want an employee to maybe be promoted, get pay raises, or maybe if they need to be disciplined or possibly even fired. So any performance evaluation, employee evaluation, has to meet the criteria that are listed below, has to be directly related to that employee's job, has to be inclusive of the entire job, not just one task that employee performs, but all of the tasks. They have to be professional, neutral, objective. So no retaliation. If you have a problem with a particular employee, just of a emotional nature, you keep that emotion out of it. So it has to be constructive. Excuse me. Employee evaluation also has to recognize any strengths the employee brings to the table. It has to be organized and has to be specific, because that can be the basis, again, of possible promotion, possible disciplinary actions, or possible termination. So that appraisal system is your best substantiation for terminating an employee. So formerly, everyone was employed at will. You were employed on a day-to-day basis. You could be fired tomorrow. That is no longer the case. Basically, especially with legal actions, the more that happens, the more a company needs a darn good reason to fire somebody. So documentation is key in human resources. So some other issues in personnel planning, get into our diversity and empowerment, and the HR challenges for family businesses, and boy, do I know that one well. So a little graphic from the book, and very visible. Diversity and empowerment, look at the 1995 workplace versus what's scheduled for 30 years from now. A typical workplace will not even be 1/2 Caucasian. So we're going to have to recognize the challenges that might be met by this. And that actually came from the EEOC. So we're looking for the following increases to the US workforce. So as a result, what is this diversity going to mean to employers? It could mean some great things. As diversity benefits, hey, you've got a wider array of skills and talents to be utilized. And you have more of a global face in your workforce. Diversity challenges, maybe you work for a company that has never had an employee who is of the Muslim faith and celebrates Ramadan. So you have to be prepared to give them the proper accommodations that they need to observe the religious holiday. And other holiday, you have to be prepared. So human resources for family businesses, fairness. Fairness is key. You don't, nepotism does not belong in a family business, but nepotism often happens. So you want to be fair to everyone, family included. And so basically treating everyone as equal as possible is the end goal of a family business. You don't want to play favorites by promoting a family member with lesser qualifications over somebody who is more qualified than that family member. Could mean lawsuit, so don't do it. So you want to strike what's an optimal balance between nepotism and what's called meritocracy. Of course, nepotism is going to be favoring family members in all business decisions, giving them the advantages and privileges over employees who are not family members. Generally, you have a family business, you see nepotism. Yeah, I've seen it. I've worked for other family businesses than this one, and yeah, I've seen nepotism at its finest. Meritocracy is really, I don't know what the goal is really to favor no one. That's why they say to strike a balance between nepotism and meritocracy. Meritocracy is favoring whoever's most competent. That's the best way. If you're going to favor someone, I guess, is the most competent, but honestly, the best thing is to favor nobody, is to treat everyone as equals, family member or not. So if an employee has to be disciplined, what does that mean? Basically, that's respecting and abiding by all the standard rules and regulations of the workplace, coming up with what the consequences are for not respecting and abiding all the standard rules and regulations of the workplace. Discipline can be voluntary, it can be enforced. So general guidelines for having a workplace disciplinary procedure. Number one, have one. Establish a set of rules, regulations, ethical code of conduct. Put it in writing, distribute it, and have employees sign on it. They should pledge to honor that code of conduct. Any violations need to be quickly identified and quickly addressed. And all parties involved in any violations do need to be listened to. So the violator themselves needs to be brought in and listened to. Maybe the person's been, late for work, but they might have a good reason. So it's a good thing to listen to employees rather than to just, fire someone at will, because firing at will can lead to lawsuits. A good measure is to establish a disciplinary committee and a good cross-divisional, a cross-company disciplinary committee. You pull from all sorts of different departments within the company, and that's your committee. You list out what the violations, have the violators report to the committee and have meetings with them. And accept any consequences that may happen. And you better have good reason to give consequences, again, because that could be lawsuits. So committee will come up with some sort of an evaluation and recommendation. Someone from HR is going to look at that, combine with their own assessment, and consider any other factors, such as maybe this employee has been, maybe they've been late 10 times to work in recent history, but looking at their work history over the last 20 years, they've never been late. So that would be a good reason to not fire someone right there. is ask them, why they have been. Considering any other factors, maybe that person has worked whatever overtime they've been offered. So any other factors do need to be considered. Also needs to be reviewed as your labor contract and any equal employment opportunity details and any other federal and state regulations. And if you do, and the committee also decides to implement some sort of disciplinary action, needs to be a clear decision and needs to be spelled out clearly and communicated with the violator. So you inform that violator of the action, the consequences, the reason for the decision, and if they can have the right to appeal that decision. And if they do have the right to appeal, you let that violator know, if you want to appeal the decision, this is the procedure, this is the time frame, and this is how you would undergo, beginning the appeals process. They have every right to do that. Okay, so that concludes our human resources chapter. So there is a 10-question quiz on Sakai open now that is covers chapter 19. Again, it's true, false, multiple choice, and I believe there are 3 fill-in-the-blank questions. So that would be due next week. Also next week is that QuickBooks Online project. If you haven't yet, and I think I've only gotten a couple of invitations to access your file as invite as accountant, please remember to do that. That's the only way I can get into your information. And then the financial statement analysis portion is submitted to the Dropbox, and I put the Dropbox in week 14, 15, and I'll put another Dropbox in week 16, but they'll all link to the same assignment. So next week will be our final examination. It is comprehensive. I haven't decided on the final number of questions yet, but I'm thinking around 50 is probably where I'll settle. It won't be any more than 50, I'll put it that way. But our chapters which will be covered are chapters 1 through 7. We skipped 8. We did 9 through 12, and then 17 and 19. And so that was really the only thing due for next week then, the quiz, the QuickBooks Online project, and study for the final exam. And I'll open it up if there's any questions. And feel free to ask. And I am available again via email, or you can always set up a Zoom session with me if you're having issues with the QuickBooks project. I'm happy to do a Zoom session with you if you need that to happen. I have plenty of time over the weekend and the weekends, evenings. Just let me know, and I'll send you a Zoom link. If there's no questions,
So sorry, I don't know if I just
Okay.
missed it, but is our final exam during class time on Monday?
You know, they never did get, they never did clarify that for me. So I say it's not, but you can take it at will.
Okay, so when is it gonna, so when will it be posted? Will it be posted on Monday then? And we'll just,
I'm gonna try my best to have it open by Saturday morning.
okay,
That's
cool.
my goal, to give you additional time.
Thank you.
Oh, you bet. Is there any other questions out there? Okay. Well, then that will end our time tonight, and hope everyone has a great evening, and we'll see you next week then. Have a good night.